Alright, I'm going to talk about finding some of the best tube amps for your money. In other words, I'm just going to try to help you find value. And I don't mean that I'm going to recommend specific amp models to you. There's enough of that out there. I've done enough of that. I've linked to some in the description so you can check those out if you want to. But what I want to do is I want to explain to you how to find value on your own just by knowing what to look for. So, when it comes to tube amps, the price range is going to be, and it's gotten higher in recent years. You used to be able to get a decent tube amp for 500 bucks, but really the value sweet spot, I guess you could call it, is kind of right around here, $800 to 1500, somewhere in that price range is kind of what you're looking for. And then from there, once you've established that you're willing to pay that amount, the brands that you're going to want to look for are, and like I said, I'm not giving you specific models, but I am going to cover some brands. These are not necessarily surprising. You might say Mesa, how can you get Mesa in that price range? I mean, you probably can't. You might be able to, but I have to put it in there because Mesa is just, they're some of the best tube amps, and they fit a lot of the boxes that I want checked that I'm going to cover in this video. Blackstar is a good lower cost alternative. Same thing with Hughes and Kettner. And then there's others. There's Supro. There's, oh, I don't know. These are probably the big ones. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. PRS tube amps are good, and there's some in that price range that you can get. But here's what I want to cover, and I'll just list these one at a time. So first, wattage. 2 is going to be channel count. 3 is going to be distortion or gain profile. And what I mean by profile is the style or the tone of the distortion that the amp puts out. Because if you get a good tube amp in a perfect world, you would be using the amp for your distortion and not a distortion pedal. Because if you look at the pros rigs, pros do not use distortion pedals, at least in most cases. You don't see like a metal zone on a professional guitar player's pedal board. That's because they're using their amps for distortion. So that's another thing we want to keep in mind is you want to be able to use your tube amp as your distortion source. So in a perfect world, you're getting your bass clean tone and your bass dirt tone, your high gain levels or your moderate gain levels, whatever style you're looking for, you're getting those from your tube amp and not from a pedal. That doesn't mean that there are not good distortion pedals out there. There definitely are, and there are some that can certainly compete with a good amp. But if you're going to get a tube amp, I think it should be able to handle both your clean and your distorted sound. So these are the three things we are going to look at. I pulled up Sweetwater. This is just where I like to send people. I do have some affiliate stuff with them just to be transparent. And if you use the links in the description, that helps me out. But it doesn't cost you anything extra. This is just where I like to shop. These guys are easy to work with. So I'm going to actually let me go back down to the brand list. Make sure I didn't forget anything. I mean, obviously there's a ton of these, but orange is a good one to look at. And I mentioned PRS. Soldano, PV might be another one to look at. Actually, I'm going to put those on my notes. PV is, they have a couple that I really like. But like I said, I'm getting carried away. I'm not going to recommend you specific amps, but those are brands to look at. Now let's put in our price range. This is where I think you will get the most value. Now, we are going to have to make another distinction between a combo amp and an amp head, and you probably already know this. Most of the really good tube amps in this price range, at least the ones that I like, are just going to be the amp head, which means then you're going to have to get a speaker cab. If you don't get a speaker cab, then that means you're going to have to get an attenuator. And if you don't get an attenuator or a speaker cab, that means you can't use the amp. Don't use an, and I've made this mistake before. I'll be honest, I messed this up. You can't use an amp head without a speaker cab or without something that manages the speaker load. It will break it. So just keep that in mind. What you should be thinking about as far as what you're going to pay, like let's just say the actually let me back up a little bit. If you're going to go with a combo amp, your options really get knocked down, and Fender sort of becomes your go-to, and maybe that's what you want. But the thing about Fender amps is that if you go back to my notes here, the distortion and gain profile is very bluesy and moderate. So what you'll find is that Fender amps, I should put combo amps. You find that their combo amps are very good with a clean sound, but they're not very good if you want some kind of a heavy gain or a heavy distortion. They just are not heavy. I don't I don't think that means that they can't be. If you go back to the pedal discussion, you probably have to add a distortion pedal to make it heavier, but that's just not what it does. So if you have to go with a combo, you're getting in this price range, you're getting a lot of Fender. That's something to keep in mind. Vox and Roland will also come up a lot. I mean, again, that doesn't mean you can't work, but that's something you need to keep in mind. You're probably going to be looking at a much lower gain setup if you want to use your tube amp for your distortion and your clean sound. Like I said, do with that what you will. That's just something to keep in mind when you're deciding between combos and an amp head. Maybe you already have a speaker cab. I don't know. Let's just assume for the sake of this discussion that you have your own cab. So what we're going to do then, once you've made that decision, is you want to find a series that you like. So for example, the DSL 100. We'll look at the Marshall DSL series. So I'm just going to search for that. Just type in Marshall DSL. And what you're going to have, see there you have a combo. You've got a couple options here. You have a combo and a head option. So what you're going to end up with is you're going to have a bunch of different wattage variations. Okay, and this is why I'm saying to pay attention to wattage. I don't like that. Let me change that. There we go. That looks better. You need to look at the wattage because every time you have a series, you're going to have different prices based on the wattage. And I don't know what situation you are in or how loud of an amp you need, but a 20-watt tube amp is going to be pretty loud. Like it's going to be really loud. And I mean, you could go up to 100, but you're going to spend more money. So typically, if you want things to be cheaper, if you want to be able to afford a nicer amp, you can get a nicer amp with lower wattage, and this actually drops it under our the bottom of our salary cap of $800. So that's just one example. You go to 100 watts to 20 watts, then I think that's a better deal, and I don't really care if it's a 20 watt or a 100 watt amp. Maybe if you have an argument against that, if there's a compelling reason, I have just never found it. I've never found a compelling reason to get a tube amp that has that high of wattage. Like I'm not playing in massive arenas or anything. So if that's something that you can see and you can agree with, then you can save yourself some money. Let's look at another example here. It's another really good example. The Badlander 100 watts, 100 watts, 25 watts. Yeah, same thing. Basically, it's the same exact thing. So the Mesa Rectifier Badlander, this is a great amp. This is really, the cleans are great, the distortions are great. You can get really high gain. It just sounds beautiful. I've tested one of these before. You can go with a 100-watt tube head and spend $2,500, or you can go with the 25-watt tube head with pretty much all the same features. That there's just very little difference in terms of tone quality and your experience, and you save yourself a ton of money, and that gets close to our $1,500 price limit. You could certainly justify going over for a Mesa amplifier. Okay, so let's go back here. My third, well, my second point, thing to keep an eye on is channel count. So how many channels you have. There are, and this is one of the things about some of the Fender amps. Well, not a ton of them. But if you only have one channel, you are going to you're going to have a more difficult time switching between a clean and dirty sound. So for example, with the Studio Classic, it's a good amp. It's modeled after JCM 800, which is awesome, but it only has one channel. So in that situation, you would probably have to have some kind of a distortion pedal, and that's not something I like. And even here, it's pretty expensive, only one channel. And if you're if that's what you want, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But I assume if you're watching this video, you're going into your browsing and shopping with some level of uncertainty. And I think that's just something that's good to point out to people who are buying a tube amp, is that a lot of them have one channel. So here again, the Vox AC10, one channel. These are known for clean tones, so you're not going to have, this is not going to be a heavy metal thing. You're not going to be using this for distortion. Same thing with the Fender Blues Junior. By the way, this is one of the amps that used to be $500. That's just the economy for you, I guess, $800 now. But it is only one channel. And if you browse around, you're usually going to see two channels, but that's just something to note, as that, especially if you're looking at combos. Here again, the Fender 68, this Vibrachamp, which is an awesome clean amp, it's just one channel. So that's something to keep in mind. If you, let's see if I can find an example of channels saving you money. Let's see. It's the dual rectifier. That's a 90s dual rectifier. Two channel. Let's see. I'm trying to find. Well, and here's another wattage. Oh, that's the Badlander. Okay, I already talked about that. Well, let's see if I can find. Because I think the dual rectifier and the. Well, I'm not going to bother looking around. The main point is that as channel count goes up, predictably price goes up. And you should decide ahead of time how many channels you want, because if you want two or three channels, that's something you're gonna have to pay for. The reason I was looking for Mesa is because I think the dual rectifier is, I think it's two channels, and then the triple is three channels, and obviously the triple is more expensive. So if you want to save a bunch of money by going from the triple rectifier down to the dual rectifier. The same thing with the diesel VH4 and VH2 amp heads. Now those are more expensive, and you're looking at like $3,000 to $4,000. But the same is true if you go from the VH4 down to the VH2. You're getting all the same stuff. It's just fewer channels. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want one channel, that's like you can save some money. So those are the three things I would think about when you are buying a tube amp. If you want to get the best bang for your buck, if you want to get what's going to be the highest value, you're going to be looking at, I would consider lower wattage. If you have a 150, 25-watt option, see what the 25-watt option saves you. My guess is that in most situations, I mean, at least the ones I've already looked at that I've already showed you, you're saving a ton of money, because it just means it can be a smaller amp. Like when the physical size of the amp gets bigger, obviously production costs for these companies go up and they have to charge more. So lower wattage, a channel count that is exactly what you need, and no more and no less. and then the type of distortion and gain levels you want. If you want a moderate, modern, or sorry, if you want a modern high gain level like a metal style, you're going to want to go with something like a Mesa or maybe at least a Marshall, and that's just something you want to think about when you're looking at these amps. Fender and Vox, they're going to be more cleans, they're going to be more blues and just kind of subtle breakup. So that's those are the three big things. Look at Marshall, look at Fender, Mesa, Blackstar, Hughes and Kettner, PRS, Supro, and Orange is another one that I mentioned. Rev and Peavey, the Peavey Invective is really good. You can look at those. And then try to aim for $800 to $1,500 price range. That is where you're going to get the most value. So hopefully that's helpful. If you have questions, leave them in the comments section below, and I'll talk to you guys next time.